Welcome to the Living the Dream podcast with Curveball. If you believe, you can achieve. Welcome to the Living the Dream with Curveball podcast, a show where I interview guests that teach, motivate, and inspire. And today I am joined by entrepreneur, endurance athlete, and podcaster, Christopher Mad Dog Russell. Christopher has been doing podcasting since podcasting was a thing. He is the creator behind the apocalyptic series, After the Apocalypse. So we're going to be talking to him about that and talking to him about being an athlete. So Chris, thank you so much for joining me today.
How are you doing, Curtis?
Oh, I'm doing pretty good, Mad Dog. Why don't you start off by telling everybody a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so like you said, I am one of those people who can't figure out what he wants to do. So I've been an entrepreneur, started and sold companies and worked for the venture capitalists and surprisingly enough, the supply chain world. Nobody even knew what that was a couple of years ago. Now nobody can stop talking about it. And I'm an endurance athlete, mostly marathons, ultra marathons, lots of stuff like that. And my latest passion, my latest gig is this science fiction serial I put together called After the Apocalypse, which I write and produce. And we're up to about 17,000 downloads a month. And I found a nice little niche and it's growing like crazy. So I figured I better get out and talk to people about it.
Absolutely. Congratulations on that. But before we get started on that, tell us about being an endurance athlete.
Yeah. So like a lot of guys, I woke up in my 30s and decided I didn't like what I saw in the mirror. So I started running and then I got hooked and I ended up qualifying for and running the Boston Marathon 21 years. Just this last year I didn't do it because I got an injury in my knee. But along the way, I dabbled in, triathlons and mountain bike racing and all sorts of stuff like that. I suppose the biggest event I did was I ran a 100-mile ultra marathon, which usually blows people's minds. But, you can do anything if you set your mind to it, Curtis, and you do the training, right?
That is absolutely right.
So I invented a project this year. I'm going to ride across Massachusetts from the corner where Vermont, New York, and Massachusetts meet all the way to Race Point Lighthouse at Provincetown, Cape Cod. I'm going to do that over a weekend this summer.
How long do you think it's going to take you to do it?
A couple days. It's only 250 miles, something like that.
Sweet. So now let's get into talking about your podcast. Tell us how you got started, how you came up with the idea, and how long you've been doing it, and what it's about.
Yeah, so it's a post-apocalyptic audio drama, I guess you would say. So I write the whole thing, and I have a gentleman who reads it for me into audio, and we try to have good, production quality and music and good writing. And the episodes are somewhere around 20 minutes long. And I drop one every other week, but it's a story of it. The idea came to me like so many other people these days. In the beginning of 2020, our world's changed, right? And I was down in Atlanta at a meeting, and I was up in the morning running down by the Chattahoochee on sort of a misty morning. And that week was when the pandemic hit really hard, and it was all, everybody was freaking out. And I just thought, I was down by the Chattahoochee going for my run. And I said, you know what? This would be a great place for an apocalypse story. And it started spinning itself in my brain. And I started writing episodes about this universe of the apocalypse that I made up. And then towards the end of that year, I said, okay, let's do a whole thing. And I strung together a season, 20 episodes in a season, and then right at the end of season 2 now. So that'll be 40 episodes this weekend.
Well, tell us how science fiction allows you to play around with taboo topics and alternative themes.
Yeah. So this, you've seen this throughout classic science fiction, right? Are you a science fiction guy? I mean, do you watch the Star Trek or the Star Wars or anything, Curtis?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you know that that's a place where it's a space where the directors or the writers or the producers can get away with stuff metaphorically that they couldn't get away with in other places. You know, you look back at the original Star Trek series, right, where they had different races working together in the 60s, right? And they would have sort of morality tales couched in outer space. So it's kind of an open spot for you to play around with things. And I like that because, you know, instead of you just, you know, people shooting guns and running after each other, you can work a lot of thoughtful themes into science fiction. It's almost like a cartoon. Like you can make cartoons do anything you want. In a science fiction universe, you can make people do whatever you want, right? And so if you look at the apocalypse specifically, I'm dropping characters, you know, look around you next time you're waiting for a bus or sitting in a restaurant, look at somebody and say, what would happen if I took that person and dropped them into the apocalypse, right? What's their backstory? How would they react? What would they do? And it's really interesting to sort of paint potential character arcs around that, you know, bringing out the best and the worst in people, as we saw in the pandemic, right?
We sure did. And apocalyptic stories have become really popular in the last decade. Tell us why you think that is.
So it's very interesting. I think a lot of it has to do with the world has become a bit apocalyptic, right? I mean, just with the pandemic, with all the stuff that's going on in the world, even though we're coming out of the end of the most peaceful period in human history, it just doesn't feel that way, right? Just kind of feels like it's crisis after crisis after crisis. And so I think this escapism of the apocalypse and the zombies, that escapism in one sense sort of matches what people are feeling, but also gives them a vehicle to sort of relieve that tension, right? To let that play itself out in a safe spot.
Well, tell us how you got to so many downloads per month and what's your listener demographic and, you know, kind of your experience in doing your show.
Yeah, so like I said, I've been podcasting for a long time, since like 2007. I had a running podcast, which I got currently at 479 or something episodes, right? So what I learned early on is there's a lot of things that people expect. They expect a certain amount of quality. I mean, you don't have to go overboard because people understand it's a semi-amateur sort of forum, but they expect a little bit of quality and they expect some structure, right? They need it to be repeatable. So if you give them the same sort of formula every week, like you're doing, you ask the same questions, and you have the same formula, they know what to expect, and then it's easier for them to come back, right? That makes it sticky. For my show in particular, I was really surprised how people found it and sort of fell in love with it, this science fiction serial. So I had some people who would, you know, said to me, oh, this isn't the kind of thing I like. And then they listen to it and go, wow, you know, I'm into it now. And so it got sticky, and it's really hard starting from zero because I haven't done any advertising or anything like that. It's just word of mouth. So I try to ask the people who are the fans or the aficionados or, you know, the friends of the show, you ask them to do it themselves and to tell other people. And it goes in waves, but it's been a steady climb over the last 18 months from zero up to, like I said, 17,000. I just got another big burst of a couple thousand a month. So yeah, I'm pretty pleased with it.
Wow.
So an interesting audience for this, right? You get your sort of hardcore science fiction type people, right? The people who like Star Wars, Star Trek. But you also, I'm meeting some super interesting people. I'm meeting some people who are like classic preppers, right? Or classic sort of gun enthusiast type people who are not people I would normally hang around with, but it's interesting to learn about that culture and learn, you know, what they're thinking, right? So it's interesting. I tell you, the interesting story is I met this guy through the podcast who is what he does is they have an apocalyptic I guess you would call it sort of like a Burning Man out in the desert in Las Vegas. And so on a weekend every year, they go out and they set up this little Mad Max community with like 3,000 people. They have this festival around the apocalypse, which I never would have imagined existed till I met this guy. And he's a sweetheart. He's a TV producer and or director. And it's fun, the people you meet by doing this. And you must realize that as well, Curtis, having interviewed so many people. I mean, I think that's the best part, right? Is you get to meet new people.
Absolutely. And speaking of that, do you base your characters off of real people that maybe you meet or people that you know?
So I think it's an amalgam, right? You can never stop from putting a little bit of your thoughts in somebody's head, right? So one of my main characters is an old man, right? And I find a lot of my thoughts or a certain type of my thoughts get into his head. And of course, he's an ultra athlete, ultra runner. So, that's obviously coming from my experience, if nothing else. And then the other character that I have as a main character is a woman. And I really didn't know what to expect because I was like, who am I to be writing a woman character? And I got really positive feedback from my woman friends about this character because I didn't want her to be that, that sort of 1980s character woman where they're, always need to be rescued and everything, right? I wanted her to be very strong and people really, the women really resonate with that for some reason. So yeah, it's good. And then of course there's a dog because you got to have a dog. The only rule is you can't kill the dog, Curtis.
And why is that?
You got to have a dog. It's the apocalypse.
Absolutely. Well, tell us how you decided where you were going to base the story at, the location.
Part of that was I had just spent a lot of time in this area. I actually have a friend who lives there. So it's in and around sort of Tennessee, sort of the Chattanooga, Tennessee area, right? That general area. No place specific, but in that general area, because I sort of knew the geography with the river and a lot of the trails. And I spent a lot of time in the distribution center area with my job. So it started out in, like I said, in Georgia, because that's where I first came up with the idea. So I had to move west into the Chattanooga area. And so I've been everywhere in the United States. But this was an area that just happened to be recent and fresh in my mind. So it seemed like a good place to base it.
So talk to the potential or the podcaster listeners out there about the importance of consistency when podcasting.
Yeah. So this was the other thing, a couple of points on that. One is that a lot of people will sit down and they'll try to write a book, right? And they'll get, a couple chapters into it and give up. Same thing when I used to train for marathons or run marathons, right? You don't have to think about the end, like the end of the 26 miles. You think about getting to the next telephone pole. So if you are able to pile up a number of 20-minute writing sessions, you'll have a book at the end of the year. And that's the consistency that you need to do anything in life, right? Not just podcasting. But in terms of podcasting for the listeners, you want to have a consistent cadence. People need to be able to expect this is going to come out once a week at least, or once every 2 weeks, or 2 times a week, right? So if you give them that cadence and you stick to that consistently, you'll build audience. And if you want to write that book, well, if you write 20 minutes 3 times a week, you'll get there in 6 months, right? It's just a question of stacking one thing on top of another and not looking too far ahead. And that's what I've done, right? So at the end of the day, I'm just finishing up 40 episodes. Those 40 episodes are going to come out to be about, 100 and something thousand words. That's, a book and a half, 2 books.
That's great. You got any upcoming projects that you're working on that people need to know about?
Yeah. So what I do is I take the summer off. So my 20 episodes are going to end up, like I said, this weekend or following weekend, I'm going to end season 2. So to prepare for season 3, I'll take a couple of months off. And what I'll do is I'll do interviews with people, but I'm also writing some other stories that I'm going to read, have read into audio. So just some fun stuff for people and a way for me to take a break and play around in some other areas. Right. And then we'll start in on season 3. I'm planning 5 seasons. And if I find a way to do it faster, I will. But right now I got a good cadence of once every other week. And the good news is that it's evergreen, right? So the people who find my shows from 2 years ago, they can start in on the story. And that's what they do. They binge listen all the way through. And by the time they get to the end, they come over and they join my Facebook group and talk about it.
Well, speaking of that, go ahead and throw out your contact information. Tell us where to find the show and give out your social media and all that good stuff. And if you got a website.
Yeah, so this one I'm keeping simple. I'm hosting it on Acast. So if you go to the Acast website and search for After the Apocalypse, you'll find my show. And the same thing on any pod, people have different podcast players. You just search for After the Apocalypse and you'll find it. It's got a picture, it's got a black and white silhouette of an old man is the picture with the words After the Apocalypse on the podcast. You'll find it there. And on Facebook, we have a group which has, I think I got 170 people now. And it's actually called Facebook's /Old Man Apocalypse. But again, if you search for After the Apocalypse, you'll find it on Facebook. And on social media, I am CYKT Russell. And I'll say that again to you and spell it out for you because it's kind of hard. It's Chris Yellow King Tom Russell with 2 S's, 2 L's. And that's Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, yada, yada, yada.
All right. We'll close this out with some final thoughts.
Well, final thoughts. I think the apocalypse isn't here yet, but it should be a lesson to everybody that you can start a new project like this and just discover a whole bunch of new people and new topics and new things that you never knew existed, right? You can do that at any age. So don't be afraid you're going to fail. Just start, right? Just start and do it, and then you'll get something out of it, right?
Great way to close it out. And just start checking out the After the Apocalypse podcast. Please be sure to check Chris out and check out everything that he's doing. Also, follow, rate, review, share this episode after listening. And Android listeners, go to the Google Play Store and download the Living the Dream with Curveball podcast app. Mad Dog, thank you so much for joining me tonight.
My pleasure, sir.
For more information on the Living the Dream podcast, visit www.djcurveball.com. Until next time, stay focused on living the dream.